Good morning, Mrs. Machel. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Bloomberg Africa Innovators event. It's wonderful to have you join us, and we look forward to an engaging discussion around media.
I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
The Graça Machel Trust recently established the Women in Media Network, comprising journalists from across the continent to look at narratives around women and children and how they're portrayed in media. If we look at gender equality, how can media play a role in advancing gender equality to drive economic change in Africa?
The Graça Machel Trust decided to establish the Women in Media Network for 2 or 3 important reasons. One, to recognize that we have brilliant and driven journalists all around the continent, but many times they don't connect with one another. So the network allowed to build a sort of a family of female journalists who are going to work together and portray a Pan-African perspective of who African women are. We recognize that women's stories are not very much present in the media. So we want to create a space in which women, they'll have their face, their voice, their aspirations, their challenges, but put out there in a way which are much more representative of the balanced way we want African women to be seen and perceived and being valued. We want to have an engagement with media houses to be part of their strategic development to promote women journalists to top positions in the newsrooms and the management of the houses, so that in leadership we also have a presence which recognizes and values the talent of African female journalists. And finally, it's because when women do this, they will really create the balance of the population of this continent. We are 62% of women, and we have to populate the imaginary and universe of our children to recognize that equality, gender equality, is part of a society which is just and fair.
Can you share with us your perspective on the role that African media can play around the inclusion of women in media houses, in media production spaces, to ensure that stories better reflect the voices and interests of women in Africa?
The media is present in our lives 24 hours in different ways. So it shapes our beliefs, the way we see ourselves as Africans. So the media is a very important tool to build the African identity, to be self-confident of ourselves, to be really assertive about what it means to be African, and also to be able to portray to the rest of the world that Africa has a lot to give and to contribute for the human family, for the global village. So I see the media as African media to claim and to portray the African identity, particularly for young generations who are exposed to whatever is produced in the rest of the world. So they need to have home-produced things which build their identity and pride. It is very important in showing how we evolve and how we transform as Africans, to express what are the transformations which are taking place on the continent by Africans, for Africans, but for the world as well. Let me add something else. I want to insist on Pan-Africanism. The media has to help us to know and to value our nations, our peoples, building the Pan-African identity. We need to know what is happening in each one of our countries, in each one of our societies, so that we build that, boiling pot, which is molding the Pan-African identity we are aiming at. So we would expect and encourage the houses on the continent, global houses like Bloomberg, to, in their relationship and working together with Africa, to take this into account, creating the platforms which can facilitate to our journalists, all of them, but in particularly young female journalists, to be trained and to take up the advantages of new technologies. But it's also the way the global community will capture our stories and to build then a more balanced view of what the human family looks like, with our beautiful different colors, with different vibrancy, where Africa has to feature not as a secondary player, but as a major player in transformation of what is the global citizens.
The Graça Machel Trust recently launched the Women Advancing Africa Forum this year, which brought women together from across the continent to shape narratives and ideas around the social and economic transformation and the role that women can play in Africa. Can you share a little bit about this forum and what the Graça Machel Trust hopes it will achieve?
Let me first underscore what we're all about. There are numerous initiatives of women coming together on the continent, but many times they focus in one area. It's health, it's education, it's water. There's very little in terms of a common agenda in economic transformation, and economic transformation as means of also promoting social transformation. So we decided to establish Women Advancing Africa with that focus on economic and transformation of society. Women to be able to meet, to think together, to devise an agenda in which they are going to rally around, but in Pan-African perspective. So it was a space in which there was really a whole lot of activities. So we discussed how do we deal with advocacy to have barriers removed so that women can move in waves so that they take advantage. And more importantly, how women can help to redesign policies, to redesign the decision-making processes in which they are not only to take part, but they have to drive. WA is really a space in which we open different kind of opportunities of mutual engagement, and we hope as we go we will be able to improve it and bring a contribution which in our view it was much needed in terms of not only to talk but to act.
So are you excited about the future?
Oh yes, I've been always an optimistic person, and I believe and I trust young people. And we could see in that space of 3 days the vibrancy and actually the eagerness to build this space. It was very clear that it was validated. Young people, mature women, they made it clear they needed a space like this. Our responsibility is just to begin, and they will take it up where they feel is the best place for them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.